Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, members. I stand here with maybe the final 250th recognition for at least the regular legislative session. As we stand here on the final day, or what I thought was going to be the final day anyway, I thought it was appropriate that we discuss the British last day in South Carolina. On December 14th, 1782, the British evacuated Charleston. For South Carolina, this was not merely the end of an occupation, it was vindication. It was the moment when the last major British foothold in the South finally slipped away, and the long struggle for independence, sacrifice, and self-government came into full view along the Cooper and Ashley rivers. Today, when Americans think of the Revolutionary War, oftentimes their minds often drift northward to Lexington and Concord and Saratoga and Yorktown. Yet historians now widely acknowledge what the truth that South Carolinians have long known. The American Revolution may have begun in Massachusetts, but it was won in South Carolina. Nowhere was that struggle more bitter, more personal, or more consequential than right here. By the time the British evacuated Charleston in 1782, the state had endured nearly every imaginable hardship. Charleston had fallen in 1780 in what remains, or at least remained, the single largest surrender of American troops until the Civil War. Thousands were captured, families were divided, plantations were burned, neighbors became enemies. South Carolina quite literally descended into a civil war within the revolution itself. And yet, even after Charleston fell, the spirit of resistance did not. Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee, and the countless unnamed militiamen waged a relentless war of attrition against the British and loyalist forces across swamps, rivers, and backcountry roads, as we have heard through stories that we have all shared with one another over the past several months. The British expected South Carolina to return gratefully to the crown. Instead, they found a people who became harder to subdue the longer they occupied them. In fact, one British officer reportedly lamented that controlling South Carolina was like holding a wolf by the ears. Why? Because South Carolina had developed something deeper than opposition to a particular tax or policy. They had developed a culture of resistance to distant power, imposing its will on local communities. The Southern campaign hardened that instinct. Men here watched royal officials dictate terms from afar. They watched outside authorities attempt to reorder local government, commerce, property, even the personal allegiances. They saw what happened when decisions affecting their homes and their families were made by people insulated from the consequences of those decisions. And after years of occupation and confiscation, military rule and coercion, South Carolinians emerged with a deeply rooted suspicion of concentrated power. Whether exercised by a king, an ocean away, or later by any far-removed central authority, convinced it knew better that the people closest to the matter at hand. The spirit became part of the political DNA of the South. Not hostility to union, not rejection of a national purpose, but a persistent belief that free people govern best when government remains closest and most accountable to them. Even after the victory of Yorktown in October 1781, the British still occupied Charleston for more than a year. Why? Because Charleston mattered. It was one of the wealthiest and most strategically important ports in North America, and the British did not want to surrender it lightly. So when evacuation finally came in December 1782, it was a moment of extraordinary symbolism. Charlestonians awoke that December morning, not to the thunder of battle, but to the sight of British sails preparing to disappear beyond the harbor, an image that many surely believe they might never live to see. British troops boarded ships and departed Charleston Harbor while General Nathanael Greene and Patriot forces prepared to re-enter the city. Imagine that scene, the same harbor through which British power had flowed, now witnessing its retreat. One fascinating detail often overlooked is that the evacuation was not only military, it was human in nature. Thousands of loyalists fled with the British, many never to return. Equally significant, thousands of formerly enslaved people also departed with British forces because the Crown had promised them freedom to those who opposed the Patriots and aided the British cause. That reality reminds us that the Revolution was not simple. It was noble in its ideals, yes, but deeply complicated in its human consequences. Another intriguing fact that many years afterwards, Charlestonians celebrated December 14th as Victory Day. Parades and speeches and military displays, church bells and public commemorations marked the occasion. In many ways, it was Charleston's own Independence Day. And perhaps it should be again, because the evacuation of Charleston represented more than military success, it represented endurance. South Carolina suffered immensely during the Revolution. Some estimates suggest more battles and skirmishes occurred in this state than anywhere else in the colonies. Homes were destroyed, commerce collapsed, entire communities were scarred for generations. Yet from those hardships emerged something enduring, that fierce commitment to self-government, local liberty, and independence from a distant authority. There's a reason the spirit of liberty took such deep root here. South Carolinians had paid deeply for it, and that sacrifice mattered not only for our state, but for the nation itself. Had the British succeeded in pacifying the South, had they fully subdued South Carolina and secured the Carolinas and Georgia, the Revolution may well have failed. The Southern campaign drained British resources, shattered British assumptions, and ultimately helped set the stage for Yorktown and the final victory. Yet in many respects, Charleston's evacuation was the final acknowledgement that the American experiment would survive. But it also left behind a permanent warning woven into the character of South Carolina. Again, concentrated power, no matter how confident it is in its righteousness, should never become too comfortable assuming obedience from free people miles away. Today, as we remember this extraordinary moment, we should do so not merely with nostalgia, but with gratitude. Gratitude for those who endured occupation, for those who fought in the swamps and the fields few Americans today could name, for those who sacrificed fortunes, comfort, safety, and in many cases, their lives. And perhaps most importantly, gratitude that they believe liberty was worth the cost. Because history teaches us something important about freedom. It's rarely preserved by those seeking ease. It is preserved by those willing to endure hardship in defense of principle. South Carolina's role in the Revolution stands as an endearing proof of that truth. So thank you all for participating in these remembrances. And may we always remain worthy stewards of the liberty that they secured. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for those excellent remarks.